monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is...
The private meeting was supposed to last 20 minutes. Princess Anne had arrived with a prepared appointment document, a trusted candidate, and the confidence that no one in the room would challenge her judgment. Then William leaned forward, placed one hand over the unsigned page, and said one word: "Stop." In that instant, Sophie's future within the royal estate system was frozen, and a conflict hidden beneath years of family loyalty suddenly became impossible to ignore. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The closed door made the silence heavier. Anne sat at the head of the table, while William faced her with Sophie between them and two estate advisors watching every movement. A royal estate trustee is a person trusted to help oversee royal properties, archives, access, and stewardship. The role carried influence beyond a ceremonial title, which was why Anne had treated this meeting as the final step, rather than the beginning of debate. Anne reached for the pen again. She intended to name Sophie to the position, but William kept his hand over the unsigned page and refused to authorize the nomination. The Princess Royal pulled back, disbelief hardening into anger. "Are you questioning her loyalty?" she asked. "Or mine?" He did not answer immediately, and that hesitation wounded both women more than a quick refusal could. Sophie remained still. She had never asked for the appointment, yet now her name stood at the center of a struggle over trust, succession, and control. Her hands tightened beneath the table as humiliation gave way to fear. William finally admitted that a confidential briefing had reached him hours earlier. A briefing is a private document prepared to explain risks before a royal decision. This one warned that the trusteeship could weaken the future authority attached to the Prince of Wales. Anne demanded the file. William refused to pass it across while the advisors were present, saying the danger reached beyond legal wording and touched a promise made inside the family years before. One advisor began to rise, but Anne stopped him with a raised hand. She closed the folder herself and ordered both men out. The door clicked shut. Only then did William look at her. Sophie watched his face change before he spoke. The nomination, he said, was tied to a promise Anne had never been meant to discover. Anne had entered the room prepared to reward Sophie's service, but William's warning transformed the appointment into something far more dangerous. A test of trust between three people who had once believed they stood on the same side. This was not simply a dispute over a title. For Anne, the appointment represented recognition long denied. For Sophie, it symbolized acceptance earned through years of disciplined service. For William, however, the trusteeship carried consequences that could reach far beyond one estate or one generation. Each person entered the meeting believing they were protecting the crown, yet only one of them possessed the power to halt the others, and he had just used it. Anne kept her eyes fixed on William. To her, the trusteeship was not a decorative honor or another royal title. It was a working position that would allow Sophie to help protect royal estates, manage access to charitable properties, preserve private archives, and guide the future use of important family residences. A trustee, in simple terms, is someone given legal responsibility to protect and manage valuable assets for others. Anne believed Sophie had already earned that responsibility. Sophie understood why the role mattered. She had spent years taking on difficult engagements, stepping forward when others withdrew, and refusing to turn family tension into public rivalry. She had supported Anne through exhausting periods of duty and had handled private royal matters without seeking praise. Now, after proving herself again and again, she sat in silence while her loyalty was treated as a possible danger. Anne's restraint began to crack. She reminded William that Sophie had protected the monarchy during moments when senior figures had stepped back, disappeared, or placed their own pain above duty. The Princess Royal did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every word carried the force of someone who believed experience was being dismissed by a future king too focused on control. William lowered his voice. He insisted that his objection was not about Sophie's character. He trusted her. He respected her. But he also admitted that stopping Anne could damage the bond between all three of them beyond repair. The prince had not entered the room looking for a personal battle, yet he knew the document contained something none of them could safely ignore. William finally explained the hidden clause. The trusteeship included a dormant succession condition, meaning a rule that would become active when the crown passed to the next sovereign. Once triggered, Sophie could retain influence over certain royal properties even after a new reign began. That authority might survive beyond Charles and continue into William's future court. Sophie suddenly understood. He was not merely blocking her appointment. He feared Anne was creating an independent center of power that the next king might be unable to control. Sophie reached into her handbag and removed a small handwritten note. She folded it once and placed it face down on the table. Her voice remained calm, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. "I prepared this because I believed the family had already agreed." Anne stared at the folded paper. Then she looked back at William and answered with quiet fury. "The family had agreed until you attended that private briefing at Kensington Palace last night." To understand why William entered the meeting ready to stop the signature, the story must return to the moment when one sealed file turned a gesture of loyalty into a threat to the future throne. The conflict did not begin at the Windsor table. It began 6 weeks earlier, during a small estate ceremony at Sandringham that appeared almost insignificant. There were no television cameras, no grand announcement, and no public disagreement. Yet one exchange beside a locked archive cabinet convinced William that Anne's plan carried consequences she had not fully understood. From that afternoon onward, the appointment of Sophie was no longer an honor waiting to be granted. It was a constitutional problem waiting to erupt. Anne had been building the case for months. She had watched Sophie take responsibility for estate charities, support rural communities, and protect traditions that received little public attention but carried enormous private value. Rural patronages are royal roles connected to farming, countryside organizations, and local communities. The Princess Royal believed the trusted confidant had done more than assist the family. She had proved she could preserve the parts of royal life that survived only through discipline and care. William had not resisted the idea. He respected Sophie's judgment and believed the trusteeship would remain advisory, limited, and answerable to whoever occupied the throne. The prince assumed Anne wanted to reward service, not create permanent power. That assumption held until the private archive ceremony at Sandringham changed everything. The estate archivist handed Sophie a temporary key granting access to a sealed collection of family correspondence. An archivist is the official responsible for protecting historical records and controlling who may examine them. Sophie accepted the key carefully, understanding that it represented trust. Then Anne turned toward the official and spoke with complete confidence. Once she becomes trustee, that access will be permanent, regardless of who wears the crown. William felt the meaning immediately. Anne continued speaking as though nothing unusual had happened, while Sophie held the key without realizing that those words had transformed a practical appointment into a challenge that could outlive the current reign. The future king said nothing until later that evening. William found Anne alone and asked whether she intended Sophie's powers to continue unchanged after Charles was gone. She did not hesitate. Trusted service, she replied, should not expire simply because the sovereign changed. The answer troubled him because royal authority depends on each monarch retaining control over the households, properties, and advisors connected to a new reign. The prince quietly ordered a legal review. The confidential assessment confirmed his fear. Anne's draft gave Sophie continuing influence over estates connected directly to his future household. Worse still, the wording had not come from the Princess Royal. A senior estate secretary had inserted the clause after citing an older family agreement. William read the final page twice at Kensington Palace. He circled the words, "irrevocable without trustee consent," then placed the folder beside a photograph of his children. He knew the signing had to be stopped. What he did not know was far more dangerous. Had Anne overlooked the clause, or had she deliberately concealed it? When William returned to Windsor carrying that suspicion, the meeting was no longer about Sophie's qualifications. It was about whether Anne had knowingly placed his future authority beyond his reach. With the advisors gone and the door sealed, Anne no longer spoke as a senior working royal defending a proposal. She spoke as a sister, an aunt, and a woman whose judgment had just been challenged in front of the person she intended to honor. William remained standing, one hand beside the disputed folder. Sophie sat between them, silent but visibly shaken. Then Anne asked the question he had hoped to avoid. "Do you believe I meant to deceive you?" William did not answer at once. He opened the confidential briefing and pointed to the continuity clause, a legal condition allowing certain powers to remain active even after the crown passed to a new sovereign. The prince explained that the wording could prevent a future monarch from reorganizing several royal estates without Sophie's approval. That mattered because those properties were not merely historic buildings. Some were tied to his future household, his children's lives, and the structure of the next reign. Anne refused to retreat. She said continuity was the entire reason she had supported the appointment. The Princess Royal wanted estate management protected from personal rivalry, court politics, and sudden changes made by new advisors. In her mind, Sophie's authority would preserve stability. It would stop years of careful work from being destroyed simply because power had moved from one generation to another. Anne rose and faced William directly. She told him that preparing to become king did not give him the right to treat every independent voice as a threat. The accusation struck hard because he knew part of it was true. His position required caution, but caution had begun to look like suspicion. William stepped closer to the table. He said she had confused accountability with control. The future king would not inherit a system where decisions about his children's possible homes were tied permanently to an appointment he had been pressured to approve. His voice remained controlled, but the fear beneath it was unmistakable. Sophie finally interrupted. She asked Anne whether she had known the appointment would be irrevocable, meaning it could not be reversed without the trustee's consent. The trusted confidant waited, searching her face for certainty. Anne hesitated. That pause changed everything. The Princess Royal admitted that she knew the clause was powerful, but she had never seen its final legal interpretation. William immediately opened the briefing and named the estate secretary who had expanded the wording. Anne recognized him. He had once worked with Prince Philip's administrative circle, the small group that handled his private estate planning and official papers. Anne took the folder and read the highlighted passage. Her anger remained, but it turned away from William. She slowly sat down, placed the pen beside the unsigned document, and spoke with cold clarity. "This is not the document I ordered." Sophie did not look relieved. She looked wounded. "If the wording is corrected," she asked William, "will you support me, or is the clause only an excuse to keep me out?" The legal danger had finally been exposed, but Sophie's questions stripped away the paperwork and forced William to confront the private fear he had not yet admitted aloud. William could challenge a document. He could reject a clause, delay a signature, and demand another legal review. What he could not easily do was explain why Sophie's appointment unsettled him on a personal level. She had been loyal, disciplined, and discreet. Yet those very qualities had made her indispensable to Anne and increasingly influential across the family. Behind the prince's legal objection rested a harder truth. He feared inheriting a monarchy already divided into competing circles of trust. William finally admitted what the papers alone could not explain. Informal alliances inside the family had begun to function like separate courts, each with its own advisors, private loyalties, charitable interests, and influence over royal spaces. A royal court, in this sense, is the group of people, offices, and relationships surrounding a senior royal. To him, those circles were becoming too independent, and every new permanent appointment made the future structure harder to control. Sophie listened without interrupting. The trusteeship would not allow her to command the crown, but it could give her influence over access to estates, archives, residences, and institutional resources used by different branches of the family. That power mattered, because control over space often meant control over visibility, tradition, and relevance. Whoever decided which family members received access could quietly shape who remained central to royal life. William told her he trusted her personally. His fear, he said, came from the office Anne had designed around her. The prince believed affection and loyalty were being turned into permanent authority without enough oversight. He could not protect the next reign if important decisions were already locked inside private arrangements made before he became king. Sophie's restraint broke. She told him that years of silence had been used against her. When she avoided conflict, the family praised her as dependable. When she accepted difficult duties, they called her loyal. Yet now that Anne had offered her real responsibility, those same qualities were being described as dangerous influence. The trusted confidant did not raise her voice, but every word carried years of swallowed disappointment. William then exposed another truth. King Charles had never formally approved the appointment. Anne had planned to secure Sophie's signature first and present the completed nomination as an established family decision. Anne defended herself immediately. She said Charles had already told her to manage estate appointments independently. William rejected that defense. The king's casual permission, he argued, could not outweigh the legal consequences hidden inside the briefing. Charles received the call in his private study. He listened without interruption, removed his glasses, and placed them on the desk. Then the monarch asked only one question. Has Sophie already seen the papers? His disappointment was not directed at her. It came from knowing she had been drawn into the conflict before he had stepped in. The king ordered William, Anne, and Sophie to remain at Windsor until he reviewed the document. Anne refused to let the matter disappear quietly into palace procedure. Charles's intervention should have calmed the dispute, yet his arrival threatened to turn a private disagreement into a judgment on Anne's authority, William's future power, and Sophie's place within the family. The appointment was suspended before the afternoon ended. No public announcement had been drafted, no palace statement released, and no formal rejection issued. Yet inside Windsor, everyone understood what had happened. Sophie had entered the meeting as the chosen trustee and left it without a title, without certainty, and without knowing whether the family still viewed her as an asset or a liability. The document remained unsigned, but the emotional damage had already acquired the permanence of ink. Charles reviewed every page in silence. The king ordered the nomination process frozen until the continuity clause, appointment powers, and chain of authorization could be independently examined. A chain of authorization is the record showing who approved each stage of an official decision. That review mattered because one unclear instruction could affect royal properties across 2 reigns and damage the trust surrounding Sophie's appointment. The monarch also removed the estate secretary from the investigation. He ordered the official to surrender every letter, note, and private message connected to the revised wording. Charles understood that the family could not resolve the crisis, while the person responsible for changing the document still controlled the evidence. Sophie returned to her private rooms carrying the same case she had brought to the meeting. She removed the estate papers, placed them inside a drawer, and closed it firmly. Yet the handwritten acceptance note remained in her hand. The trusted confidant could not throw it away, because those words represented the recognition she had believed was finally hers. Edward found Sophie sitting in silence. He asked what had happened, but she struggled to explain the humiliation without sounding bitter. She told him she could survive being denied a position. What she could not accept was the belief that her loyalty should remain useful, invisible, and powerless. Edward listened, then reminded her that quiet service did not mean she deserved quiet rejection. Anne soon uncovered a darker detail. The estate secretary had relied on a private memorandum linked to Prince Philip's long-term planning. A memorandum is a written note used to record a proposal or instruction. The official claimed it allowed trustees to retain authority after a change of reign. William obtained the original file and discovered the truth. Philip had never signed it. The paper was only an unfinished proposal, preserved in the archives but never approved. Someone had deliberately turned a draft into apparent authority. Anne entered Sophie's room without aids and began to apologize. Sophie stood before she could finish. You placed my name on a document you had not fully read. Anne accepted the rebuke. Her voice softened, but her warning remained sharp. William still owed Sophie the answer that mattered most. Had he stopped an unlawful clause, or had he stopped her personally? The false authority could be exposed, and the document rewritten, but the central wound remained untouched. Sophie still did not know whether William believed she deserved the role at all. That evening, William asked Sophie to meet him alone in the small library adjoining the private apartments. No advisors waited outside. Anne was not present. Charles had not instructed either of them what to say. For the first time since the confrontation began, there was no document between them and no institution to hide behind. Sophie entered prepared to surrender the appointment entirely. William entered knowing that stopping the signature had been necessary, but that the way he had done it may have been unforgivable. William spoke first. He admitted that he had challenged her in front of advisors when he should have asked for an immediate private pause. The prince had turned a legal concern into a public humiliation inside a closed room, and he knew that distinction offered little comfort. His apology mattered, because Sophie had not merely lost an appointment that afternoon. She had been forced to watch others debate whether she could be trusted with real authority. Sophie answered with painful calm. The role had mattered because it would have proved she was trusted not only to support the monarchy, but to help shape and protect it. A trusteeship is a formal responsibility to manage and preserve assets on behalf of an institution. To her, it represented years of service finally becoming influence rather than remaining invisible work. William lowered his voice. He admitted that his fear of divided authority had caused him to treat her as part of the danger before allowing her to defend herself. The future king had imagined separate family circles competing for estates, advisors, and influence. In trying to prevent that future, he had wounded someone who had spent years preventing conflict. Sophie refused to accept an easy apology. She told him that trust could not mean praise for obedience followed by exclusion whenever responsibility carried power. The trusted confidant had stayed quiet because the family valued discretion, but silence had become a cage. She would not accept a title designed to keep her useful, while ensuring she remained powerless. William then placed a revised proposal before her. Sophie could still become trustee, but the office would operate under transparent oversight, face review at the start of every reign, and hold no control over properties reserved for the sovereign's direct household. Oversight means that important decisions are checked by others, rather than left to one person alone. The prince added one more condition. Charles and William would approve the appointment jointly, giving Sophie authority recognized by both the present monarch and the future one. Sophie read the first page, then closed it without signing. She would accept only if Anne remained part of the final process, and was not publicly blamed for the secretary's manipulation. William agreed, but warned that Anne might reject a compromise that reduced the independence she had intended. Sophie and William had found a possible path forward, but peace still depended on the woman whose original decision had ignited the crisis, and whose pride had been wounded most deeply. By the following morning, the private meeting was private no longer. The public did not see the unsigned document, the unfinished memorandum, or Sophie's folded acceptance note. They saw a royal family divided by a single explosive sentence. William had stopped Anne from rewarding one of the monarchy's most trusted women. The story moved from the sealed rooms of Windsor to television studios, newspaper stands, and the palace gates where loyalty, succession, and power became subjects of national judgment. Palace communications staff released only one careful sentence. They confirmed that a royal estate appointment was undergoing procedural review, meaning the official steps behind the decision were being checked before approval. The restrained wording was intended to calm the story, but it did the opposite. Silence around the details created space for suspicion, and every missing answer made the conflict appear larger. Commentators quickly divided into two camps. Some argued that William had protected the future sovereign's authority before an irreversible power structure could take hold. Others accused the prince of humiliating Sophie and overruling Anne before fully understanding what had happened. The debate mattered because it was no longer only about one appointment. It had become a public test of how the next reign would handle loyalty, independence, and control. Anne watched the coverage alone and grew furious as broadcasters described her as reckless. She knew she had failed to examine the final clause closely enough, but the Princess Royal refused to accept that one mistake erased decades of judgment. She had tried to reward Sophie's service. Now the same act was being presented as an attempt to undermine William. Sophie found the sympathy almost as painful as the criticism. She told Edward that she did not want the trusteeship awarded because viewers pitied her. The trusted confidant wanted the position because she had earned it, not because the public had turned her disappointment into a campaign. Edward understood that her greatest fear was no longer rejection. It was acceptance for the wrong reason. The palace then released a second statement. The disputed memorandum linked to Prince Philip had never been authorized, clearing Anne of deliberately trying to bypass William while confirming that the process had been compromised. Hours later, another announcement said a revised trusteeship framework had been agreed in principle. That meant Sophie had not been rejected. The dispute concerned the office's powers, not her character. One London newspaper captured the crisis with a front-page image of William's hand resting over a closed folder beneath the headline, "The signature he stopped." That afternoon, a small crowd gathered outside Windsor Castle. One woman held a handwritten sign reading, "Trust Sophie, protect the crown." Public pressure demanded a winner and a loser. Inside Windsor, however, the family prepared a final decision designed to deny the country both. The public expected either William to retreat or Anne to surrender. Yet the final meeting would produce something more difficult and more meaningful than victory. The final meeting took place 2 days later, at the same Windsor table, where the appointment had collapsed. The original folder was gone. In its place rested a shorter document with clearer powers, stricter limits, and 4 lines for 4 signatures. No one entered unchanged. Anne had lost confidence in a process she believed she controlled. Sophie had learned the cost of being discussed rather than consulted. William had discovered that protecting the future crown did not excuse wounding those who had protected it for years. Charles opened the meeting without delay. The king confirmed that the original appointment had been permanently withdrawn, and that the unauthorized continuity clause was now formally invalid. A continuity clause is a rule allowing authority to survive from one reign into the next. That power had created the crisis because it could have limited the freedom of a future sovereign without clear approval. The monarch then presented the revised trusteeship. Sophie would oversee designated estate preservation, charitable access, and heritage projects, while major property decisions would remain answerable to the sovereign and heir. The new structure gave her meaningful authority without allowing one appointment to bind the crown indefinitely. Anne turned toward Sophie and apologized directly. The Princess Royal admitted that loyalty had become her reason for moving too quickly. She had wanted to secure recognition for the trusted confidant before another reign could overlook years of service. Her intention had been protective. Her mistake had been assuming that good intentions made careful scrutiny unnecessary. William followed with an apology of his own. The prince admitted that stopping the signing in front of advisors had made Sophie appear untrustworthy. He stated clearly that his objection had never been to her fitness for service. It had been directed at unchecked authority and a document no one in the room fully understood. Sophie accepted the revised role, but only after adding one condition. Every future appointment would have to be explained personally to the individual involved before any family agreement was treated as final. Her clause ensured that no royal would again become the subject of a decision made around them rather than with them. Anne remained chair of the Estate Council, the group responsible for coordinating long-term property and heritage decisions. The compromise did not erase her influence. It placed her experience inside a structure William could safely inherit. Charles signed first. William signed second. Anne paused, looked at Sophie, and offered her the pen. Sophie added her name, then returned it. The Princess Royal completed the document last. This time, no hand moved to stop her. William's intervention had not ended Sophie's advancement. It had prevented a flawed appointment from poisoning her future relationship with the crown. Anne's error was real, but so was her devotion. Sophie emerged not as a rejected royal, but as a trustee whose authority had been openly earned and clearly defined. The confrontation proved that loyalty could no longer depend on private assumptions, inherited understandings, or unsigned promises. The monarchy survived because all 3 chose accountability over pride. There would be no further battle over the appointment. Sophie had received the responsibility Anne believed she deserved. William had protected the authority he would one day inherit. And the family left the room with something stronger than an unchecked promise. Trust that had been tested, rewritten, and finally made real. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.